Every collapsed company has a phase where the person in charge stopped leading and started performing, and the people closest to the work saw it first. They could not report it. There was no form for it, no language for it in the review process. They just knew. In the way you know something you can feel but cannot prove in writing. By the time the layoffs arrived, or the restructuring, or the analyst downgrade, nobody inside was surprised. They had been watching it happen in slow motion for months. This video is about the person at the center of that collapse. A fraudulent boss is a different problem from a bad boss. A bad boss is difficult, unfair, or underdeveloped. A fraud is something else. A fraud is someone performing the image of leadership while hollowing out the conditions that make real work possible. The job has been replaced with the performance of the job. That distinction matters because the performance can run for years, and the organization around it keeps absorbing the damage until something structural gives out. Fraud bosses rarely look dramatic. They usually look professional. They show up on time, they speak fluently, they know which words survive in executive review, they know which optics hold up in a recap. They substitute the appearance of thinking for actual thinking, confidence for competence, narrative control for execution, political motion for problem solving. Every system they touch begins to show the same pattern: more talking, more slides, more reframing, less of whatever the team is actually meant to produce. You have probably worked for one. You may be working for one right now. The reason you cannot name it is that no single behavior convicts them. Good leaders have bad weeks. Real competence can still look awkward. The fraud is only visible in the pattern, and the pattern only emerges over time. This video walks through 15 signs in 3 layers. The first 4 show the performance itself, the way a fraud manufactures the look of leadership. The next 5 show the internal machinery that protects the performance from being questioned. The final 6 show what the performance does to the company around it. By the last 6, the collapse is already in motion. You just do not read about it yet. Watch for the pattern. The first sign is that they talk like a leader far more than they think like one. Every sentence is finished, polished, delivered with the rhythm of something rehearsed. The language lands with the weight of a decision, even when no decision has been made. What you are hearing is the finished version of thought that never happened. Examine what was said, and there is very little underneath it. General observations about alignment, focus, culture, execution, words that cannot be tested, phrases that sound important in a room and evaporate the moment someone tries to act on them. You have lived inside this meeting. They make a confident pronouncement. The room nods. A week later, you are trying to implement what they said, and the instruction collapses the moment it touches a specific decision. You ask for clarification. You get more of the same language, slightly rearranged. Real leaders think out loud when the problem is hard. Their language becomes less polished because their attention has moved to the substance. A fraud is the reverse. The harder the question, the smoother the language becomes. Smoothness is the tell. Every statement is a landing without a runway. The second sign is visibility as an obsession. Their job has converted from doing the work to being seen near the work. They appear in the leadership threads. They volunteer for the executive meetings. They find reasons to be named in the recaps that travel above them. The time they put into being visible is disproportionate to the time they put into anything that actually ships. Look at their calendar. Status updates expand. Strategy sessions multiply. Any meeting that produces a document with their name on it gets prioritized. Any work that produces a result without their name on it gets reassigned. The performance needs surface area, and surface area means meetings, decks, and mentions. What gets squeezed out is the work itself. Deep problems need sustained attention. Root cause analysis needs time off the stage. A fraud cannot afford time off the stage because time off the stage feels like losing ground to the peers they are competing with for visibility. So the work deteriorates in the background while their executive footprint keeps expanding. The optics improve every quarter. The operation beneath them gets weaker every quarter. Nobody above notices until the gap becomes untenable. The third sign is the way they use language itself. A competent person uses jargon for precision. An incompetent person uses it for cover. A fraud uses it to borrow authority. They reach for terminology from disciplines they do not actually practice, and they use it with a confidence that discourages anyone from asking what they mean. You hear words like leverage, alignment, operating model, strategic posture, optimization function, and none of them attached to anything specific. The sentences run, but they do not resolve. When someone junior asks a clarifying question, the answer usually contains more jargon. The goal is to keep the conversation at an altitude where only they seem comfortable breathing. You leave the meeting with a document full of phrases you can neither execute on nor push back against. Any attempt to pin down what was actually decided makes you look slow. The meetings feel intellectual. The work that follows them is disoriented. People stop asking. They start nodding. They translate the vague instructions into their best guess and take the risk of being wrong. Jargon in this mode has stopped being vocabulary. It has become a fence. The fourth sign is the substitution of confidence for competence. A fraud has learned that confidence is read as capability, especially in rooms where decision makers do not have time to verify. They speak decisively about subjects they have not studied. They make predictions without engaging with the underlying data. They correct other people in areas where they themselves are weak because correction reads as expertise to anyone who is not watching closely. Over time, confidence becomes their primary management tool. If the team is worried about a deadline, they respond with reassurance. If a risk is raised, they tell a story about why it will work out. The certainty is consistent. The accuracy is not. A particular exhaustion settles into the people who actually know the subject. You sit in the meeting aware of the gap between what is being claimed and what is real. You carry the correction in your head while the conversation moves on. You stay silent because you have learned what happens when you speak. The longer this continues, the more you begin to doubt your own judgment because the pattern of being overridden slowly starts to look like being wrong. The fifth sign is that questions begin to carry a cost. In a functioning team, a good question is a favor to everyone in the room. It surfaces the assumption and clarifies the gap. It saves the project from a mistake that would have cost more time later. Competent leaders treat questions as free information. A fraud experiences questions as a tax because a real question exposes the thinness of their thinking in front of the people they need to impress. So a reflex develops. The questioner becomes the problem. They get described as negative, not aligned, difficult to work with, too in the weeds. You know this feeling. You rehearse a 2-sentence clarifying question in your head for the entire 40-minute meeting. You decide not to ask it. You message a colleague afterward to confirm you were right to stay silent. They were doing the same math. Nobody has to say out loud that questions are unwelcome. The reputation of the last person who asks one does the work. Meetings become performances of agreement. The real doubts move into private messages. The cost of the unasked question always lands later on someone who had nothing to do with the original silence. The sixth sign is the direction in which credit and blame move. Watch what happens when something goes well. The fraud becomes the voice in the recap. Their framing travels up. The people who did the work appear only in aggregate, if at all. My team executed well is the standard phrasing, and the word my is doing most of the work in that sentence. Watch what happens when something goes wrong. The language changes. Specific names appear. The breakdown gets located in a decision made somewhere below them, and their role in that decision has been edited out of the story. If the problem is serious enough, a reorganization follows, and the reorganization always moves the blame further from their office. You have seen your own idea come back to you 2 weeks later in their voice, repackaged as their insight, presented to the level above. You did not flag it. You learned from the colleague who flagged it last quarter and got called territorial. Over time, the team stopped sharing. People document their contributions defensively. The collaborative texture hardens into something cautious and transactional. The seventh sign is how they manage the talent around them. A fraud cannot afford a clear-thinking senior employee sitting beside them. Clarity is a threat, so the threat gets managed by keeping their strongest people slightly disoriented. Priorities change without explanation. Information arrives in fragments. Meetings are called and then restructured at the last minute. The strong employee spends unusual energy just figuring out what the week is about. At the same time, the weaker employees, the ones whose survival depends on the boss's favor, are pulled closer. They hear about changes first. They are given access the stronger employees are not. Their loyalty is guaranteed because their standing would collapse under any other leader. They are safe to have nearby because they will not ask anything dangerous. The effect is an inversion of the org chart. The people who should be driving the work are held at a distance. The people who should be developing under stronger mentors are embedded in the inner circle. The org chart on paper and the org chart in practice have become two different documents, and only one of them is honest. The eighth sign is that history stops being fixed. Decisions made 6 months ago get described differently today. Risks that were dismissed are now described as risks they always flagged. Projects that failed were, in the new telling, compromised by forces outside their control. The initiative that was launched as a flagship is now, suddenly, always intended as a pilot. There is no single big lie. There is a continuous low-level editing of what happened. This is possible because most organizations do not keep clean institutional memory. Decisions live in the heads of the people who were there. When those people leave, the record leaves with them. They use time as an ally. The further a decision recedes into the past, the more flexible it becomes. You sit there as the new version of events is described. You remember what was said. You remember who said it. You learn that correcting the record costs more than you can spend. Over time, you stop trying. The history of the department becomes whatever the boss is currently describing. The ninth sign is the composition of the inner circle. Every leader needs people around them. What matters is what those people were selected for. A competent leader wants at least one person in the room who will contradict them, one person who knows the operational details better than they do, one person whose judgment can be trusted under pressure. A fraud selects for predictability. They want people who will reinforce the narrative in meetings, confirm the boss's version of events in corridors, and flag internal threats before those threats become visible to the level above. The inner circle functions as a moat. Everything coming up from the field gets filtered through the loyalty layer first, softened, reframed, or omitted. The decisions made from that filtered information are almost always slightly wrong. The error accumulates. By the time anyone above can see it, the boss has already repositioned themselves somewhere new. The 10th sign is the repetition of the same problems. In a healthy organization, problems surface, get diagnosed, and the underlying condition gets addressed. The problem may recur elsewhere, in a different form, under different people, for a different reason. Inside an organization run by a fraud, problems cycle. The same complaints come back every quarter. The same bottleneck appears in the same project review. The same customer issue gets escalated every few months, and the response is a new task force with a new name and the same design. None of the initiatives address the root cause, because the root cause is usually a decision the boss made, a relationship they refuse to disturb, or an incompetence they cannot admit. The real fix would require acknowledging one of those things. That acknowledgement is the one move the fraud cannot make. So the performance of fixing becomes the fix. The initiatives are announced, the slides are presented, the problem returns. Employees stop expecting resolution. They route around the broken piece rather than escalate it, because escalation has stopped producing change. The broken piece stays broken, and the work learns to move around it. The 11th sign is the pattern of who leaves and who rises. The strongest employees start to exit. Some are loud about it. Most are not. They line up the next role and disappear on a Friday. You can usually tell which one is next. They stop disagreeing in meetings. Their feedback in the all-hands survey shortens. Their camera stays off during optional calls. Then one day they are gone, and the manager is surprised every time. In their place, a different kind of employee rises. The criterion for promotion becomes agreeability. The ones who produce the least friction with the boss get pulled upward. The ones who reinforced the narrative, who never questioned a decision in writing, who smoothed the path, are rewarded for reliability of tone rather than reliability of work. Their promotions look normal on paper and feel wrong to anyone who has worked with them closely. Over a year or two, the shape of the team changes. Depth gets replaced by presence. The people who could have carried the organization through a difficult period are no longer there. The ones who remain are optimized for survival under a specific boss. The 12th sign is the texture of the work itself. Planning horizons shrink. Nobody is building anything more than a few weeks out. Decisions get made and then unmade. Projects start on urgency and get abandoned on a change of mood. The calendar fills with meetings that exist to respond to other meetings. Your own week has no through line anymore. You wake up and find out what the priority is. Inside this environment, energy gets redirected. People stop spending their time on the craft of the job. They spend it on positioning. Which project is safe to attach to? Which peer is rising? Which piece of news should be delivered in person and which in writing? The political layer has eaten the product layer. This is almost always traceable upward. Chaos at the top produces politics at every level below. When a boss cannot plan, their direct reports cannot plan. When their direct reports cannot plan, the teams below cannot either. The whole organization starts running on reactive energy, and the people inside forget that work is supposed to feel different from this. The 13th sign is the divergence between the dashboard and the ground. At some point, the metrics start looking good while the work is getting worse. The charts climb. The quarterly review is full of green indicators. Executives above the fraud are shown a picture that does not match the one their employees are living inside. This is possible because metrics can be selected. The flattering ones get reported. The inconvenient ones get retired, redefined, or delayed. When a number stops telling the desired story, a new number is introduced. When that new number also stops cooperating, a narrative gets wrapped around it to explain the context. There is always a reason the data looks good. The inconvenient data is always temporary. Meanwhile, the customer complaints are rising. The internal tickets are piling up. The product itself feels slower, thinner, more broken. The people who interact with reality know the metrics are no longer describing it. The dashboard is healthy. The thing the dashboard was built to measure is not. The one level of the company that needs the truth is the only level that will not get it. The 14th sign is the widening gap between the leadership story and the worker experience. At some point, the distance between the two becomes absurd. Leadership is describing momentum, transformation, and alignment. Workers are dealing with tooling that has not been fixed in a year, a hiring freeze that was not announced, and a roadmap that everyone on the team knows is fiction. The all-hands message does not intersect with the day-to-day job in any recognizable way. Employees develop a kind of double life. You listen to the leadership broadcast as a ritual that does not describe your work. Then you go back to your desk and do a different job than the one being discussed publicly. In the group chat, 6 of you are privately laughing at the phrasing while posting thumbs up emojis in the channel. Morale does not crash dramatically. It erodes through the daily confirmation that the people in charge are either unaware or have decided not to acknowledge it. The best employees stop engaging with internal communications altogether. The disengagement is self-protection. Taking the company's words seriously has become a liability. The 15th sign is the final one, and it only becomes visible in retrospect. The organization can still function in short bursts. It can ship a quarter. It can pull off a launch. It can survive a board review. What it cannot do is build anything that requires a 2-year arc. It cannot hold a strategy in place long enough for compounding to work. Every long-term project gets killed, restarted, or redefined before it can mature. This is what a fraud produces at scale. They have optimized themselves for the next visibility cycle, the next promotion conversation, the next executive summary. They cannot sponsor anything that will pay off after their own political window closes. so the team around them inherits the same metabolism. Everything is short. Everything is reactive. Nothing accumulates. Compounding requires trust in next quarter, and trust in next quarter has already been burned through. The company at this stage is still technically operating. Revenue may still be coming in, but the capacity to build something durable has been used up. What remains is a structure that can perform for one more quarter and then has to find another quarter to perform for. The collapse is already in motion. The public has not been told yet. None of this is dramatic while it is happening. There is no single moment where the fraud becomes undeniable. The signs arrive at different speeds, from different angles, over months and sometimes years. Each one is easy to explain away in isolation. Bad week, hard quarter, demanding board, difficult market. The individual signs look small enough to absorb. That is how fraud bosses survive the review cycles that should have caught them. The pattern is where the truth lives. When language has replaced thought, when visibility has replaced output, when confidence has replaced competence, when loyalty has replaced skill, when metrics have replaced reality, and when short-term motion has replaced long-term building, the company has already stopped being the thing it appears to be from the outside. It is a structure held up by a performance, and the performance is eating the structure underneath it. If any of this sounded familiar, you were not imagining it. You have been watching the failure for months. You carried the corrections. You rehearsed the unasked questions. You knew which decisions were real and which were theater. You knew where the product was actually weak, where the team was actually thin, where the strategy was actually hollow. What you lacked was a safe channel to say any of it out loud. The system was built to filter you out before you reached anyone who could have acted on what you knew. By the time a company is publicly described as having failed, the layoffs, restructurings, leadership departures, analyst downgrades, all of it are late indicators. The real indicator was the day you walked out of a meeting and realized the person in charge was not thinking, they were performing. Everything after that was a countdown. The fraud does not hide. Most systems are simply not built to see it until the damage has already been done. And most of the time, the person who collected the evidence first was sitting 3 seats away from them, unpromoted, being described as difficult.